Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
Cira was running to the hospital so fast that her temples began to throb with pain and her vision darkened. The doctor urgently asked her to come, but, unfortunately, she got stuck in a terrible traffic jam. Unable to sit still and wait for the traffic to finally clear, Cira handed the money to the taxi driver and dashed onto the road. She maneuvered through 3 lanes of cars and sprinted. At that moment, she was thinking about the worst possible outcomes. She constantly reminded herself, find out what they'll say first, then worry. However, each time, her imagination painted grim pictures. Her son had been battling a severe autoimmune disease for 3 years. His body was attacking itself. Doctors managed to put him in remission, but the illness kept returning. This time, it was more serious than usual. Therapy was no longer effective. Cira made every effort to earn money, emptied most of her savings, and put Emiliano at the best private clinic, where she was rushing now. Saturnino Esteban, her son's treating physician, asked her to come for a conversation as soon as possible. Obviously, it wasn't a good sign. Cira burst into his office, and only then did she feel how exhausted she was. She bent over, clutching her chest, greedily gasping for air. "Why did you run so fast?" Saturnino asked. "Sit down on the couch and catch your breath." "Well, you asked me to come quickly." "I thought something terrible had happened," Cira justified herself. "It has, hasn't it? You wouldn't summon me so urgently for nothing. I didn't mean you should have come here the very second I called. Anyway, let's get straight to the point." The doctor paused for a moment and continued with a completely different tone. "The conversation is indeed unpleasant." Saturnino explained that Emiliano needed a bone marrow transplant. Previous therapy was no longer effective, and this was the only chance to beat the disease. The boy's condition was deteriorating every day. He could no longer fight the illness. His body was weakening and surrendering. But there was another problem. There was no suitable donor in the registry. "If you're willing, we can take a sample from you right now to see if you're a match," Saturnino continued. "Unfortunately, even relatives aren't always compatible." Cira covered her face with her hands and dropped her head onto her knees. She began to cry bitterly. The doctor had no idea what was happening. He had mentioned that there was a chance. Saturnino mentally scolded himself for bringing up the possibility of incompatibility. He didn't know what words to choose to comfort the distraught mother. However, he had no clue that the problem wasn't about compatibility. It was much worse. "It's all over," Cira uttered. "I'm not Emiliano's biological mother." "What? Why didn't you tell us this earlier?" the doctor exclaimed. "I didn't think this information would be of any use to you," Cira replied. "Only one close friend of mine knows about it." "That's it." "Well, the boy must have some relatives. Try to find them as soon as possible," Saturnino told her. "I'm afraid that's impossible," the woman said, looking at the wall. "I've tried to learn something about his past, but they told me that the documents are lost." Cira's life seemed to follow an unfortunate script. She had always been alone. In school, she only interacted with 2 friends, one of whom remained her closest and dearest. Relationships with guys didn't work out either. Cira's mother died early, and she had never seen her father in her life. Cira was a fairly attractive girl, and she had admirers, but she couldn't build any serious relationships. Ambitious and with a strong character, she often scared men off. Although she tried a few times to establish something serious. Her first boyfriend of 5 years had been cheating on her with her best friend, one of those she had been friends with since school. Overnight, Cira lost both her love and her friend. They were planning to get married. In the end, Cira's school friend married her former boyfriend. Cira had no interest in how their fate and family life unfolded. The second serious relationship was equally disheartening. Cira's boyfriend turned out to be a freeloader, constantly claiming that his accounts were frozen, so he couldn't support himself or his girlfriend. Cira forgave everything because she was in love. Eventually, he asked for a huge loan and disappeared. After a few attempts to find him, Cira admitted that she had been deceived and didn't pursue the fraudster further. Cira hadn't lost faith in love yet and had decided on a serious relationship for the third time. It was her last attempt. She met a wealthy man who treated her well, was caring, and kind. The couple even planned to get married, but everything changed when Cira agreed to marry him. Her lover turned into a tyrant, forbidding his future wife to dress provocatively. According to him, any dress or skirt above the knee, with a slight neckline, was too much. He opposed her wearing makeup and didn't allow her to go anywhere without him except for work. The last straw was when the man hit Cira because she hadn't managed to prepare dinner for his return. Of course, Cira couldn't tolerate such treatment. No love or wealthy life was worth it. After the last relationship, Cira had to see a psychologist. Her former lover had completely shaken her mental health. But after therapy, she returned to her former self, even more confident. Now, she would never let anyone hurt her again. Cira made good money. Her career skyrocketed after breaking up with her last boyfriend. She dedicated herself entirely to work, climbing the corporate ladder from a simple manager to the position of deputy director at the local bank within a few years. However, her relationship with colleagues was strained. She didn't attend parties, and no one invited her to group lunches. This was due to her strict and demanding nature. While Cira led the company to success, increasing profits, it came at the cost of normal social interactions and friendly relations as colleagues tended to avoid her. On the surface, everything in her life seemed to be in order. She had an apartment in the city center, a good job she loved, and a loyal friend. Yet, one thing was missing in her life to be completely happy: family. She didn't suffer from a lack of social interaction. She was accustomed to handling everything independently. Cira hadn't given up on men but couldn't find the right one. At the age of 37, she remained single. After Cira's friend, Dorothea, became pregnant, Cira felt more despondent. She also wanted to become a mother, but for now, she only cared for her cat. That's when the idea of adopting a child from an orphanage crossed her mind. Are you out of your mind? We don't know what genes the child might inherit, Dorothea tried to dissuade her. Kids in orphanages often come from families with various issues. Not true, Cira responded. I believe that upbringing, not genes, is what matters. I'm 37. Imagine how much time will pass while I'm searching for a husband and we're going to try to conceive a child. I don't want to spend my old age surrounded by a bunch of cats, feeling insignificant. I want to have a child, even if they're not my blood. Dorothea didn't argue with her friend anymore. In the end, everyone had their own life, and only Cira could decide what she thought was right. She believed there was some logic in her reasoning. In any case, the most important thing was for Cira to be happy. And she was, but not for long. Cira was approved for adoption almost immediately. With a decent salary and excellent living conditions, she appeared as a well-mannered and educated woman to the orphanage director. Cira quickly chose a boy she wanted to adopt. It was the baby, with bright blue eyes and light hair, who melted her heart. He had recently arrived at the orphanage. Cira was deeply concerned when she saw a mark on the baby's body. She worried about how the local carers treated the sore spot. Cira adopted Emiliano when he was just 6 months old. She intentionally chose such a young child to experience all the stages of motherhood. She was overjoyed. Now, the picture of an ideal life was complete, even without a husband. She compensated for the lack of love through her interaction with her son. Cira took a break from work to adjust to her new role. Dorothea immediately offered her help. As an experienced mother, she knew how to soothe a baby with colic and what to apply to alleviate teething discomfort. Dorothea was genuinely happy for Cira, especially enjoying the opportunity to give advice. It was a rare occasion where Dorothea excelled more than Cira. Cira loved her new role so much. She was going through the streets with a stroller, proudly holding her head high. Neighbors were surprised, How did they not notice she was pregnant? Cira didn't tell anyone that she adopted a child from an orphanage. Not because she was ashamed, but because she wanted everyone to think she gave birth herself. She answered questions evasively, stating that he was her son. She enjoyed buying clothes for the baby and choosing the nursery decor. It was all new and unfamiliar to her. Cira didn't even mind when she didn't sleep for several nights in a row. She didn't know where she found strength for her son. Taking care of the baby brought her joy, and the lack of assistance didn't weigh her down. Cira found enough support and advice from Dorothea. Until the age of 4, Emiliano had no health problems. He grew up as a smart and obedient boy. However, one day he got strep throat. Something went wrong with the treatment of this common illness. As the doctors later explained, the prescribed medications were unsuitable for him. There was no indication of allergies or intolerance to drugs in his orphanage records, but the child's immune system didn't react well to the therapy. A common sore throat led to the development of a life-threatening disease, aplastic anemia. For 3 years, Emiliano had been fighting this disease. Cira directed all her efforts to save him. They visited numerous clinics and tried different treatment methods. Occasionally, they managed to bring the disease into remission, but it always came back. Eventually, Emiliano needed a bone marrow transplant. Without this procedure, there was no way to save him. Cira had no idea where to find his relatives. When she asked the orphanage for information about his family, they told her that his parents had died and there were no other relatives listed in his records. The day Cira will never forget arrived. She had been sitting on the bathroom floor the entire evening and night. Never before had she felt so helpless. She was praying for her son's health, seeking help from God, but she realized that Emiliano's relatives wouldn't magically appear, and her strength and capabilities played no role in this situation. It was the end. And it was hard to imagine a more hopeless situation. Cira was screaming, pounding her hands and feet on the cold tiles. What else could it do? She didn't dwell in despair for long. She simply wouldn't allow herself to give up. Not now, and not in this situation. She quickly pulled herself together and resolved to find someone, even if she had to travel the entire world. But she didn't know where to start. Cira wasn't going to give up. She decided to visit the orphanage again, from where she took Emiliano 7 years ago. The same woman, Yvonne Prieto, was still the director. She recognized Cira immediately and was delighted with her visit. However, when Cira told her the reason while she was there, Yvonne Prieto's joy quickly faded. Emiliano came to us without any documents, the woman explained. We're not even sure if he was born in the capital. Perhaps he came from another city. But how is that possible? Cira wondered. You didn't find him on the street. Someone brought the boy here. Or did you take him from a family? That's what I say, we literally found Emiliano on the streets, said Yvonne. He was lying in the park on a bench, wrapped in a blanket. We checked all the surveillance cameras in that area, and after reviewing several hours of footage, we only saw one girl with a similar bundle in her hands. However, the quality is so poor that it's impossible to accurately identify if she was carrying Emiliano. We don't even know what this girl looks like. Have you tried to find the girl? Asked Cira. No, as I said, maybe she has nothing to do with your son at all, the woman replied with a slightly guilty tone. She was captured by the camera at the park entrance, and we haven't seen her anywhere else. Why are you hiding the truth from me? Cira persisted. Yvonne reassured Cira that no one was deceiving her. Despite their desire, they couldn't help her. The child was found on the street. No one ever looked for him. What could they do? It doesn't happen like this, Cira insisted. Maybe you want money? Please, I can sell my apartment and take a loan. Whatever you want. I'll give it to you, just tell me something. Forgive me, I really can't help you. Do you think we're not worried about Emiliano's fate? Yvonne said. All I can do is share his illness with the press and involve charitable foundations to raise funds. Cira lowered her head and cried. She explained that only a relative could become a donor for Emiliano. Without that, there was no point in fundraising, charity, or anything else. If they didn't find anyone, he only had a few months left to live. And those would be terrible and agonizing days. But Yvonne repeated again that, despite her sympathy, she couldn't help in any way. Cira left with nothing. Though she had been told before that Emiliano's documents were lost, she still held a small hope for a miracle. But when she heard the director's words, it became evident that the situation was hopeless. Cira wanted to confide in someone, cry, and get at least verbal support, so she went to visit her friend Dorothea. What if that girl is Emiliano's relative? Maybe she's his mother, Dorothea suggested. What? Cira exclaimed in horror. The girl was only 13. Nowadays, anything can happen, Dorothea waved her hand. If she was some orphan, maybe she gave birth when she was still a silly girl, so she threw him away. No, I don't believe that, Cira disagreed. And what difference does it make? It won't help me save Emiliano. I don't even know what to do. I'm running out of money, and it seems like there's no use in all the efforts I've put in. If I don't find Emiliano's relatives, it's the end. In reality, Cira had already sacrificed a lot to pay for her son's treatment. She had spent almost all the savings she had accumulated since the first day she started earning. She sold her car and garage, but she didn't regret any of it as long as her son was healthy. Maybe you should visit a healer? Dorothea suggested. If modern medicine isn't helping, you can try alternative methods. Cira looked at her friend as if she were crazy. While she also had an interest in mysterious and unexplored things, she wouldn't risk her son's health by trusting it to psychics. Why are you looking at me like that? Dorothea seemed a bit offended. By the way, we used to go to a fortune teller together 3 or 4 years ago. But it's one thing to find out if you'll get married or not, and quite another to cure a disease, Cira laughed, further upsetting Dorothea. Sorry, but no. I haven't lost hope that much yet. We could go to a psychic who might find this girl, Dorothea persisted. I've seen on TV that they help locate people. It's all nonsense. No one claimed that the girl in that recording was carrying a bundle with a baby. It's all unclear, Cira replied, tired of Dorothea's fairy tale suggestions. The woman quickly changed the subject to not quarrel with her friend. Cira asked about Dorothea's daughter, knowing that Dorothea enjoyed talking about her child. While her friend shared her daughter's achievements, Cira almost didn't listen. She silently nodded and praised the photos of the clay crafts the girl made, all while thinking about how to save her son. The next day, Cira decided to take the subway to go to the hospital. She hadn't been there for several years. It felt like a step back for her. After having to sell her car, Cira had been moving around solely by taxi or on foot. But now she needed to save more, so she could overlook her principles. The first thing that caught Cira's eye when she descended into the subway was the huge number of people. Everyone was rushing somewhere, crowding, pushing, and stepping on each other's feet. She felt completely lost and scared. However, Cira hadn't forgotten how things worked there. She quickly pulled herself together and headed for the turnstile. Suddenly, she saw an old lady who looked even more frightened and lost than Cira a few minutes ago. The elderly woman stared at the turnstile, holding a banknote in her hands, not understanding what she needed to do. "Let me help you," Cira offered with a smile. She swiped her card at the turnstile, paying for the old lady's fare. "Thank you so much, dear. I might have stayed here if it weren't for you," the grandma thanked Cira. The old lady introduced herself as Acacia Gonzalez. Cira also gave her name. They started talking, moving aside not to disturb anyone. Something prevented Cira from taking her eyes off this kind and sweet woman. She was radiating warmth and comfort. She didn't seem as old as Cira initially thought. She was modestly dressed, and her eyes were very kind. "You probably came from another city," Cira asked her. "Yes, I came from the village." It's my first time in the capital, Acacia shared. It's beautiful here, but so noisy and crowded. Yes, that's true, Cira agreed. Acacia explained that she came to visit her granddaughter, who was studying in her first year at the university. She praised the girl, talking about how Luz got into college on a scholarship. Luz was fully dedicated to her studies and didn't want to return to the village, so Acacia had to travel to visit her. She has no one but me, Acacia said. My poor orphan. I can see that you're not very happy either, Acacia suddenly said. It's written all over your face that you feel sorrow. Cira instantly darkened. Perhaps the conversation with her friend from yesterday had an effect, but for some reason she felt like Acacia was going to tell her fortune. The old lady's eyes sparkled, even though they were sad. Her gaze, which had been constantly moving around the area, stopped on Cira. Acacia took her hands, and a pleasant warmth spread through the woman's body. I do have a problem, but you probably won't be able to help me with that, Cira replied, gently freeing her hands from Acacia's. For some reason, Cira felt afraid, but she didn't move away from her new acquaintance. Life is very cruel, especially to good people, Acacia suddenly decided to share her memories. I once had a son, Ignacio. He was such a good lad, the village's first heartthrob. He also went to the city and found a wife. Alba was a good girl. They were so happy together. But they weren't destined to live with joy. First, they gave birth to Luz, my granddaughter. She was such a clever, independent girl from childhood. Then they had Antonio, and that's when the happiness ended. Cira listened as if enchanted, forgetting that she was actually in a hurry to see her son. But it was so interesting to find out what happened to Acacia's son, especially concerning the fate of the children. Alba probably got tired of dealing with Antonio. He was the complete opposite of Luz, constantly crying and screaming. Ignacio complained to me that they couldn't get enough sleep because of his tantrums. And it seems Alba, due to lack of sleep, forgot she was making broth. She fell asleep with the child during the day. Such a terrible fire happened. Luckily, Luz wasn't at home at that moment, she was in class. And Ignacio had just come home for lunch. He rescued Antonio from the apartment, but when he went back for Alba, he never came out again. What a nightmare, Cira said, almost with tears in her eyes. Did they perish? Yes, my son and his wife suffocated, Acacia replied. And the kids were left as orphans. So, you're raising 2 grandchildren. What a heroine you are. Cira admired the old lady. Not at all, Acacia said sadly, waving her hand. They took away my children and didn't give me the chance to raise my own flesh and blood. Antonio also suffered a little in that fire. He was wearing a synthetic suit, and the sweater burned to his skin in one place. It was such a terrible burn. My mother was a healer, but she didn't practice any witchcraft, she just made herbal infusions and tinctures. I foolishly offered to treat the burn with my homemade ointment, and they took it all into custody. Social workers went around the village, and the neighbors told them everything, that I was a local witch. Why did they say that if it's not true? Cira was surprised. Well, what can you expect from them? It's a village, Acacia shrugged. What else do the neighbors have to do? They spread various rumors about each other. They really consider me a witch, despite the fact that my mother never did anything like that. They even declared me mentally ill and took the children away. And I heard nothing about their fate until Luz turned 18. It was hard for me back then. Did your granddaughter come to you on her own? Cira clarified. She did. She said she had always been waiting for me, but I never came, Acacia said. Oh, it was so hard for her too. They wanted to separate her from Antonio, but she ran away with him. He was just a baby back then. Luz wanted to come to me, but they caught her when she was going to the train station. She never saw her brother again. We don't even know if he's alive at all. The grandmother cried bitterly. It was clear that the memories were hard for her. Cira hugged Acacia and supported her. I think you will definitely find your Antonio. Don't worry. Maybe he will come to you on his own, Cira reassured the grandmother. Luz knew where to go, but Antonio was still a baby. It is unlikely he will find us. But thank you for the support, Acacia thanked her new acquaintance. Cira explained how to get to the right station for the grandmother, and there her granddaughter was supposed to meet her. The woman was again left alone with her thoughts. Acacia's story somewhat pulled her out of her harsh reality. For a moment, she forgot about her own problems. But now Cira was thinking again about how to save Emiliano. It was amazing that just yesterday she was talking to her friend about a healer, and here she meets a witch in the subway. Although the grandmother claimed that she didn't do anything like that, Cira somehow felt that she could help her. It was so hard for Cira to enter the hospital, and even harder to go up to the top floor. And it was completely impossible to open the door of the ward where her child was dying. Every day, Emiliano was getting weaker and weaker. He looked really bad. A lot of machines were connected to his skinny, small body. But it was all in vain. When Cira entered her son's room, he was asleep. It was very stuffy in the room, and the woman decided to open the window. Apparently, it was also hot for Emiliano because he pulled up his shirt almost to his neck. Suddenly, Cira noticed a scar under his ribs. Of course, she always knew about its existence, but she hardly ever thought about it. Emiliano got this injury in infancy when Cira took him out of the orphanage. There was a wound in that place. None of the social workers knew how the baby got this injury. And now Cira has guessed where her son got this scar from. It suddenly dawned on her. Cira compared Acacia's story with the information she had. The woman's heart pounded quickly, and her hand started trembling. So, this old lady is Emiliano's grandmother. Cira shouted out loud. The woman quickly ran out of the room. Cira was running, knocking down everyone who crossed her path. She remembered the station Acacia was traveling to and knew the name of the university where her granddaughter was studying. Cira was praying to find both of them. Her grandson has a sister who ran away from the orphanage, Cira reasoned to herself while traveling to the right station. And Emiliano was seen with the girl. Acacia's granddaughter was injured in the fire. Emiliano has a scar, the origin of which no one knows. Everything matches the age. I'm just sure that I found two relatives of Emiliano. More precisely, Antonio, as it turned out. Cira arrived at the right station. Of course, Acacia was no longer there. So the woman went to the university. She hoped that the orphan girl lived in the dormitory and probably couldn't afford to rent an apartment. Cira hoped to find Luz there. The receptionist at the university dormitory turned out to be surprisingly friendly and kind. Cira involuntarily remembered her own dorm commandant. It made her shudder as she held all the students in fear. Luz? From the first year? She asked again. And the last name? You know how many girls named Luz we have here, don't you? I don't know the last name, Cira said apologetically. I know she's an orphan. Well, that doesn't make the search easier, the woman shrugged. At that moment, another lady approached her. She already looked like someone you wouldn't want to bother with personal questions. She looked at Cira and furrowed her brows disapprovingly. Why are there strangers in the dormitory? What room were you going to? The formidable woman asked. I'm looking for a girl, a freshman, Cira replied, trying to sound more assertive because she knew that she had to communicate with such people in the same way. She's an orphan, studying to be a speech therapist. If you don't even know who you've come to see, how can I let you in? The dorm commandant asked even more sternly, furrowing her brows even more. It's fine, Laura. Do we have some kind of top-secret facility here? Her colleague was trying to soften her. Cira had had enough. She didn't come here to stroke the ego of a stranger. She came for help. If it wasn't for her desperate situation, she would have left immediately, unable to bear such rude treatment. But now she gathered all her courage and took control of the situation. I just asked whether a girl lives here, Cira muttered through clenched teeth. She's an orphan. Maybe I found her relative. Don't you have any compassion? The two women glanced at each other. The one who was a little kinder blushed with embarrassment for her friend, while Laura became even angrier. She was in charge here, and no one dared to contradict her. The dorm commandant had taken a deep breath, preparing to unleash all her anger on Cira, when a loud voice stopped her. "Cira, what are you doing here? I'm so glad to see you again," Acacia said as she was walking into the hall. She had just returned from seeing her granddaughter, who appeared behind her. Cira immediately guessed that this was Luz. She strongly resembled Emiliano. She had the same blue eyes and light, curly hair. "Here's Luz, the stranger I told you about. If it weren't for her, I wouldn't have found you," Acacia introduced Luz to her grandmother. Both the grandmother and Luz didn't understand why Cira was crying. They hadn't offended her at all. They hadn't even said anything yet, and she was just looking at them. The tears were streaming down her cheeks. The receptionist and Laura were even more surprised by this turn of events. The dorm commandant had completely forgotten that just a moment before, she was ready to throw Cira out onto the street. Now they were curious to see what would happen next. However, Cira didn't let them do it. She asked her new acquaintances to go outside and talk there. "Luz, do you remember how you and your brother were separated?" Cira asked the girl. She wanted to make sure that she was indeed her son's sister before making her request. "Of course, I remember losing him. Not a day goes by that I don't blame myself for what happened," Luz said. It was evident in her eyes that she truly regretted her actions. "I remember being so tired that day. I had been begging passers-by for hours to get enough money for a ticket to the station. This is probably how they found me. When I finally had enough money, I left Antonio on a bench and went to buy a ticket. I'm so ashamed, but I could barely stand on my own 2 feet at the time. That's where they caught me." Luz burst into tears. It was obvious that she still couldn't forgive herself for leaving the little boy alone on the bench. "Don't worry, you were too young to think about the consequences then," Cira comforted her. "Can you imagine what could have happened to him? What if he had been attacked by dogs, frozen, or starved?" Luz said through tears. "Why are you even asking me about this?" "Because I know that your brother is alive, but things aren't going well for him," Cira said, and tears welled up in her eyes. Acacia gasped and covered her mouth with her hands. Luz looked at the woman, hope shining in her eyes. "He's alive? And you know where he is?" she asked. "Yes, because I'm his mother," Cira replied, smiling. "His foster mother, of course." Both the grandmother and Luz widened their eyes. They couldn't believe what they had just heard. Suddenly, the girl remembered that Cira had mentioned the boy had some health problems. "You didn't go looking for us for no reason, did you?" she asked. "Unfortunately, I've got a sad reason," said Cira. "If you're ready, we'll go to the hospital right now to make sure that Emiliano is really your relative." Both of them nodded. They didn't ask any more questions. Of course, they wanted their blood relative to be found. On the way, Cira told her story about how she adopted Emiliano and what she knew about his origins at the orphanage. Luz agreed that the stories were similar. Then Cira added about the scar above the ribs. "I don't remember where the burn was." "I certainly remember that it was on his body," Acacia said. "Yes, Granny, it was exactly on his ribs." "I remember that for sure," said Luz. "I'm sure we're going to our Antonio right now." "I'm sorry, they didn't tell me the boy's name." "I named him Emiliano," Cira added modestly. "It doesn't matter. The main thing is that he is my brother," said Luz. The women entered the ward. Luz immediately rushed to the boy. She kneeled in front of him and looked carefully at his face. "It's him. I'm telling you, it's definitely him, Granny," Luz said slowly. There was excitement, tenderness, and joy in her voice. Acacia also approached the bed and looked at the sleeping boy. "Luz, he's so much like you, especially when you were little," said the grandmother as she wiped away her tears. Throughout this time, Cira was standing modestly in the corner of the ward, not to disturb the sisters and the grandmother's admiration for her son, whom they lost 7 years ago. It's a pity that Emiliano couldn't regain consciousness and talk to them right now, though he was completely unaware of who these people were. Luz, are you willing to be a donor for Emiliano? Only a relative can save him, Cira asked. Why are you asking? Of course, I'll do everything to save him, said Luz. Take all of me, but save Emiliano. Cira left the girl with her grandmother in Emiliano's ward so they could spend some time alone with him, and she went to the doctor. She told Saturnino that she found her son's relatives, and they were willing to be donors for him. Excellent. These are very good news, said the doctor, delighted. Tell them to come here now. I'll explain the procedure. We'll take the tests and check compatibility. If everything is fine, we can perform the operation this week. Cira couldn't believe her happiness. She ran to the ward to deliver the news from the doctor as soon as possible. She was in such a hurry that she didn't notice the wet floor sign. Cira instantly flew into the air and fell to the tiled floor with a crash. A loud crunch resonated throughout the department, followed by a loud cry. The commotion drew the attention of the whole hospital. Everyone looked at the woman, who was lying on the floor, with her arms and legs sprawled in different directions. Cira had broken her leg, and it was a complex fracture with displacement. You're lucky that you fell in the hospital. There is not far to go, joked the traumatologist. I don't share your joy, Cira said indignantly. My son will have to undergo a complex operation, and I will be in a cast and won't even be able to help him. Cira was admitted to the hospital. She was fully immobilized for several weeks, the most important weeks of her life. That same evening, when she broke her leg, Luz and Acacia came to visit her. Cira, don't worry, the grandmother reassured her. We talked to the doctor. Luz had the tests taken. We'll know about the transplant tomorrow. Yes, don't worry. Granny will look after both Emiliano and you. I'll always be there to help. Saturnino said they'd discharge me on the same day after the tests. Luz supported Cira. I'm so lucky to have you, Cira replied. Dorothea did not leave her friend without attention either. She came to visit her on the very first day. Cira immediately shared her joy, telling the amazing story of how she met Acacia and about Emiliano's sister, who would be the donor. Aren't you afraid that after Emiliano recovers, they will take him away from you? Asked Dorothea. You know how to escalate the situation, Cira laughed at her friend. How can they take him away? He has been my son for 7 years. No unexpected relatives can take him away from me. Cira did not even think about the possibility that these nice old lady and the kind girl would want to separate her from Emiliano. Even if they did want it, legally, Hay could not do it. But another question troubled her, how to explain to the boy who these grandmother and the girl were. Why did they agree to help? Cira would gladly have arranged for them not to see each other after the surgery, but she understood that it was also wrong. Cira lay in the hospital for a whole month. During this time, Acacia, Luz, and Dorothea visited her. However, she was only concerned about the progress of Emiliano. Luz did become a donor for Emiliano. Cira was so happy to hear this news. Finally, the worst was over. Now the boy faced several difficult months of rehabilitation. But it was still better than waiting for death. Another woman was in the room with Cira. She, too, had a broken leg. Every day, a man named Salvador visited her. He immediately caught Cira's attention. He was so handsome and well-mannered. He always asked for permission to enter the room, greeted the patients, and asked about their health. Over time, Cira noticed that Salvador had held his gaze on her for too long. Once, he even brought her a bouquet of flowers. Mora, you are lucky to have such a husband. I hope you didn't mind that he gave me flowers? Cira asked her neighbor. Mora burst out laughing and shook her head. Cira was a little surprised by this reaction. It even made her feel a little offended. Was she incapable of provoking jealousy in anyone and looked so silly? But her neighbor quickly explained everything. She noticed that Cira darkened instantly after her laughter. "Salvador is my brother," replied Mora, laughing even louder. Now Cira smiled too. She noticed that she was genuinely pleased to hear this information. "We don't look alike, so I'm not surprised you didn't guess," said Mora. "But I wouldn't allow my man to openly admire another woman like that." Cira was embarrassed. "No one admires me," she said coyly. "I know my brother well." "He definitely finds you attractive," her neighbor continued. "By the way, I told him your story. I hope you'll forgive me for that." But he took it as his own tragedy. He was so worried that he asked me if everything was all right with your boy. "In that case, I must give him my phone number so that next time he can ask me directly," replied Cira. After Mora was discharged, Salvador continued to visit the room, which had become so dear to him. However, he now only visited Cira, and they got to know each other better. It turned out that the man had been alone for a long time and had given up on finding any kind of relationship. But Cira simply drove him crazy. The story of her son deeply touched Salvador. When she told him that Emiliano was her adopted son, he was even more impressed. "How did you dare to take such a step?" he asked. "Raising a child alone?" Cira said that her desire to be a mother was stronger than any fear. Although her son's illness had knocked her off track, she still didn't regret her decision. Salvador confessed that he too had wanted to adopt a child from an orphanage. He was infertile, but he didn't have the courage to take such a serious step. Cira was discharged from the hospital before her son. She immediately went to visit Emiliano. Seeing him, she couldn't hold back her tears. There he was, her boy, looking much better, smiling, and reaching his arms out to hug her. Cira hugged her son so tightly that his spine bones cracked. "Mom, it hurts," Emiliano said, laughing. "I missed you so much," his mother replied, loosening her grip a little. Cira asked her son about his well-being for a long time, and he was interested in her crutches. She couldn't move around on her own yet. When she finished sharing the latest news, Emiliano asked her the main question. It had been troubling him for several days. "Mom, who's the girl who became my donor?" Emiliano asked. Cira immediately became serious. She hadn't told her son that he was adopted. Of course, Emiliano had no idea that he had a sister who saved his life. His mother didn't know how to tell him about it. She didn't plan to hide the truth from her son her whole life, but she didn't want to reveal all the details so early. She believed he wasn't ready yet. "She's your sister," replied Cira, deciding not to go into further details. "I didn't even know I had a little sister," the boy exclaimed. "That's great. Can I meet her?" "Of course you will meet her once your health fully normalizes," his mother replied. It was clear that brother and sister needed to meet. Luz and Acacia were eager to talk to Emiliano as soon as possible, but Cira put off the meeting. She couldn't imagine how to present this news to the boy. For 7 years, he thought that he had no one else except his mother. How could she explain that he had 2 new relatives now? Cira decided to ask for advice from Acacia and Luz. They themselves were waiting for this conversation. "We can tell him that we lived in another city," suggested Luz. "Are you also in favor of not telling him that his real parents died in the fire?" Cira clarified. "I think it's still too early. After all, Emiliano is only 7 years old," said Luz, looking at her grandmother. From Acacia's expression, it was clear that she didn't agree with her granddaughter. Her eyes were sad, and her lips trembled, as if she wanted to say something but couldn't. "Acacia, please speak up," Cira asked. "I wanted to talk to both of you together to find the right solution. I believe that the child should know the truth, and I want my grandson to honor the memory of his father. He was a worthy man," the grandmother said proudly. "Granny, he's only 7. He has recently overcome a life-threatening illness, and you propose to shoulder this burden on him?" protested Luz. I still want us to come to a mutual decision, Cira added modestly. Neither Luz nor Cira expected Acacia to insist so strongly that Emiliano should have learned the truth about his family as soon as possible. A real scandal broke out between the women, specifically between the grandmother and the granddaughter. Cira only occasionally added that she wanted to peacefully resolve the issue. Luz argued that such news would simply destroy the child's psyche, but Acacia didn't want to hear her out. In the end, the discussion dragged on for several hours, and the grandmother gave in against her granddaughter's arguments. Luz managed to convince her. Therefore, we'll tell him when he's older. For now, we'll say you lived in another city, right? Cira clarified as a conclusion. Yes, Luz replied firmly. Acacia only nodded in agreement, looking offended. Deep down, she was against this decision. Maybe you should introduce him to your man as a real father who just lived in another city? Acacia asked sarcastically, earning a disapproving look from Luz. No, Cira calmly said. I don't plan to deceive my son. Furthermore, I'm willing to tell him the whole truth about you two right now. But I believe we should prioritize Emiliano's health and well-being. I don't want to cause him psychological trauma. Acacia apologized for her snarkiness, explaining that she also cared deeply for Emiliano. She wanted to connect with the boy as a grandmother, but for now, he would think she was just a friend of his mother. This was the hardest part for her to accept. After such a heavy conversation, Cira wanted to talk privately with Luz. She couldn't understand why Luz was so rude to her grandmother, who was the closest and dearest person to her. This is how my personality formed after living in an orphanage, Luz answered, avoiding eye contact with Cira. I heard that children there can be cruel. Was it really that bad? Cira asked. If only it were just the children, Luz sighed heavily, recalling. Teachers, caregivers. It felt like everyone there hated you. As if I were to blame for being an orphan. It wasn't my decision. I'm so grateful to you for helping my brother avoid my fate, so I can't be against you. Grandma doesn't know how hard it was for me there. Would I have run away if it were as good as a health resort? She doesn't know, but I tried to escape 3 more times afterward, and each time, they caught me. I can't imagine what kind of person Emiliano would be if he were in my shoes. The next day, Cira decided to introduce her son to his sister and grandmother. They agreed to meet in the evening after Luz finished her studies. However, during the day, Cira visited Emiliano to share the joyful news. She was still contemplating how to introduce Acacia to her son when someone else made the decision for her. When Cira entered Emiliano's room, she was surprised to find Acacia already there, showing the boy the photo album. Cira was taken aback, realizing what was happening. Out of respect for Emiliano and the age of Acacia, she refrained from causing a scene. Mom? Emiliano asked, tears welling up in his eyes and his chin trembling. One more second, and Emiliano would burst into tears. Cira recognized these signs very well. She approached him with a smile, wanting to convey that everything was okay. Mom, is it true? What that old lady told me, is it true? He asked. Cira silently nodded. She didn't know how to proceed. She was afraid of the next questions her son could ask and worried about how he would react. I was just coming to tell you about it, Cira said, her voice hoarse with emotion. She shot a glance at Acacia. She harbored no anger towards the woman but felt so hurt that she decided to go through with everything in secret. Couldn't they have all gathered together and told Emiliano the truth? Cira wasn't against it. Emiliano, I want you to know that I've always loved you and will continue to do so, Cira said, finding it increasingly difficult to hold herself together. She slowly approached her son to embrace him. How she feared that Emiliano would reject her now. What if he stopped loving her? But the boy hugged his mother tightly, pressing against her chest. Mom, I'm so happy. Now I have a grandma and a sister too. By the way, when will I meet her? The boy asked. His voice was joyful, and, surprisingly for Cira, he took the information about his real parents quite calmly. She breathed a sigh of relief. Luz will come to see you tonight after her classes, Cira said. Acacia had been sitting with her head bowed apologetically. She even blushed with shame when Cira looked at her again. They left her to talk without Emiliano. I'm sorry, but I just couldn't keep it to myself. I'm not going to turn him against you, I swear. Acacia immediately began to justify herself. I just want to make sure he knows who his parents were. I'm short on time. I want to be sure that our grandson knows about his roots. It's okay, Cira said, although inside, a storm of emotions was raging. The main thing is that he took it well. I hope it won't affect him negatively in the future. When Luz heard that Emiliano already knew everything, she initially became angry too. She shot an even more resentful look at Grandma than Cira did. Acacia shrank, her neck completely disappearing into her shoulders. Cira decided to stand up for her. Don't worry. Emiliano took it calmly. He's looking forward to meeting you. He doesn't know and will never know about the bench incident. You can be sure of that, Luz reassured Cira, calming down. The girl went to her brother alone. He had such a big smile on his face. She responded in kind. Luz silently hugged Emiliano, and they had been sitting like that for a few minutes. Then brother and sister were sharing stories about themselves. The boy was talking about his love for soccer and promised to show his skills to his sister when he fully recovered. He's the most wonderful child I've ever met in my life, Luz said when she left her brother's room. Thank you for raising him. Luz and Cira were embracing, while Acacia was standing aside, shifting nervously from foot to foot. She still felt guilty, especially fearing her granddaughter's reaction. Cira wasn't as categorical in her feelings towards Acacia. Come here, Luz said with a smile, hugging the grandmother. And you truly are a healer, Cira declared. If I hadn't met you in the subway, I might never have saved Emiliano. The boy was discharged after a month and a half. Doctors warned that the illness could recur, but Cira, for some reason, was confident that it wouldn't. After triumphing over death, she was no longer afraid. Following his recovery, Cira and her son moved into Salvador's large house. The relationship between the couple reached a new level. Salvador quickly bonded with Emiliano, and they found common ground. He even built a small soccer field in the backyard, and they played together in the evenings. Cira couldn't believe she now had a real family. She had given up hope of finding a worthy father for her son, but Salvador turned out to be an excellent choice. Perhaps you had to go through all these trials to ultimately live a happy life, Dorotea, her friend, said. I also think it's a worthy reward for the pain endured, Cira said in response. Emiliano missed the beginning of the school year, but his sister gladly helped him catch up. He started school at the age of 8, but that didn't prevent him from making many friends. The boy joined the school's soccer section as well. Every weekend, he met up with his sister. Luz occasionally came to assist him with his studies. They were inseparable. It seemed like Luz wanted to bridge the communication gaps with her brother after years of separation. During vacations, Emiliano visited his grandmother. Cira took her son for checkups several times a year. She worried deeply that the illness might return. Yet Emiliano remained healthy and happy, surrounded by friends and family. No one questioned or remembered that they weren't blood relatives. Their relationships were genuinely familial. What was even more beautiful was that everyone got along. Cira welcomed Luz's visits to her brother, joyfully took Emiliano to spend time with his grandmother in the village, and observed with delight as her husband and son bonded.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe.